You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. I'm your host, MacNaught. Thanks for checking us out. Today's episode is going to be a mashup, I think is kind of the best way to say it, because if you're a podcast listener, and for this show, that means you're a logistics podcast listener, I'm sure my guests today don't need an introduction because you probably already subscribe to them on LinkedIn or check out all the great content that they're producing daily. So today's guests are going to be Scott Luton and Greg White of Supply Chain Now, and we're going to be talking all about the role content producers like them and myself and content generally play kind of in our industry. And for some reason, if you haven't listened to them or you only listen to my show and you don't know Supply Chain Now, first off, go subscribe to them right away. But here's a quick little bio, just kind of wet your whistle a little bit. Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain, the people, the technologies, and the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. They bring experts, leaders, and practitioners together to share perspectives and insight on the leading issues impacting the world of end-to-end supply chain management. Supply Chain Now's podcasts and webinars have been downloaded over 5 million times since May 2017. So, without further ado, Scott, Greg, how's it going?
Hey, good morning, Kyle. How you doing?
Yeah,
cold.
Great.
I'm cold. I know you
guys
guys
is, I think.
Yeah.
When it's cold in Southtown, you know it's cold in America, right?
All my Florida family and friends are all like bundled up in their stuff. I'm like, oh, it's only like 20 here in Massachusetts. I'm handling this. It's not too bad. But
you got your tree already? Looks nice.
The tree already. I think it's already dead. So we'll figure that out. I know my back passed around. They'd probably kill me for having a dead tree and the fire hazard of all that stuff. But yeah, for you guys, quickly, I mean, just elevator pitch. Scott, start with you. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I mean, your experience and the amount of content you guys produce in general. But tell them a little bit about yourself and Supply Chain Now.
Sure. Appreciate it. So after spending a lot of my career in the manufacturing industry, that component of end-to-end supply chain, early on, I was working with a global supply chain association after we identified that there wasn't, believe it or not, 8-9 years ago, there wasn't enough content on the world of supply chain, right? And if you think of volunteers for associations and small chapters with small nonprofit budgets, that didn't have the digital wherewithal to make it convenient for their members to get better at what they do, that's a gap we saw, and we dedicated monthly content to it. Well, that grew into the podcast in May 2017. And, based on feedback and based on really, Kyle, much like you, a sheer joy in facilitating discussions that folks learn from and they get better at, or their organizations get better at solving problems, old and new. That's the genesis of Supply Chain Now. And it's been an incredible journey. It's been great to collaborate with great people like Greg and Amanda and Clay and the team. And then, of course, the guests and the partners and really selfishly learning from the best of the best and filling in that blind spot that we all have from a leadership bandwidth, from or leadership standpoint to a supply chain standpoint to just a global business standpoint. We're never going back. It's a global business world, and that is presented blind spots for everybody. And it's so rewarding to be able to, from our neck of the woods and with our growing spotlight, to give voice to the supply chain industry. And that's the mission we're on.
It's a hell of an elevator pitch, Scott.
It was a long ride to the top.
But I love that whole thought that it's like literally 2017. Yeah. Like you think of it, you're like, wow, that wasn't, I mean, this year's made everything feel long as hell. But for the most part, like that's not too long ago. I mean, that was right then. And it's fascinating. Greg, I know your story is very interesting too. Just a quick elevator pitch. We'll see if we can actually do it this time.
Yeah, I appreciate you thinking it's interesting. I wonder how many people actually do. So I actually started as a practitioner. My first supply chain job was the job my father got for me, and I'll never forgive him for it. So stocking shelves and pushing oil across the parking lot in a Kmart, which if anybody remembers them.
Ooh la la.
And then I moved into other companies, graduated from college, did some other things, but ultimately came back to supply chain in retail. And then went to work for a technology company who wanted to build a retail customer base out of a distribution-based product, help them accomplish that, started my own company, offloaded that to private equity, ran another company in supply chain, and then offloaded that to a large customer named for a river. And then since that, what I've been doing is advising. And Scott and I actually met on the Georgia Logistics Summit. We're on the executive committee of that. And what I do now is I advise, take board positions, mostly technology companies, but companies in the supply chain, and then do some investing and help investors source and select investments in supply chain for the most part.
Wow. It's just, I'm thinking already, our topic for today is sort of what our role in supply chain is, but it's so fascinating because, you two come from very different backgrounds than mine. Like, I was never in the supply chain. I was very much a media production, doing live streaming, stuff like that, worked for a nonprofit, and then got to here. It's fascinating, the different voices that are kind of creation. But that's
but Kyle, that's the beautiful thing, because the industry experts like you, because so much of what has gone on in the industry has been in the under the table. It didn't have a voice. It didn't have a spotlight. It didn't have chops like you to really elevate it, elevate the mission, elevate the profession, elevate the craft, as Greg heard in an interview recently. So that, I think it's a beautiful thing that we've got folks like you in the industry.
So I want to actually, this was a question I was going to say for later, but I want to pivot to it now. What do you guys think about the role the younger generation's playing? I think that there's a lot of stuff that's growing within the supply chain that's really making the need for content, the need to stay educated, the need to stay up to date important. But I also, like you just said, I think that you're seeing more and more, especially with supply chain now, you guys, like the assistants and the associates you guys continue to bring in are all these fresh, young, energetic kids. But supply chain, I worked for engineers, I worked with firefighters, I've worked with tons of different companies in media production, and the hardest part is always kind of learning the language. Nothing has come close to the logistics industry of trying to learn the language of logistics.
Amen. There. Yeah.
Like, I feel like a lot of the content sort of like, man, I wish I had this years and years and years of experience to really speak the language. How important is these kind of younger generation entering the workforce, but knowing how to create content? How important are they to the sort of the industry right now?
Greg.
Yeah, I think it's critical, frankly, because look, there are 44 million supply chain professionals in the States, right? And there's still over 2 million jobs unfulfilled. The role of supply chain has changed over just the last few years, from necessary evil to competitive advantage to in the forefront of your brand identity. And it's critical to be able to communicate that and communicate it rapidly. So I think it's like in any industry, new generations are always important, but specifically the awareness of how to get the word out most effectively, right? And to understand how people want to consume information. It's absolutely critical. I mean, yep. I think, I kind of think of mine and Scott's generation as kind of a bridge to that. I mean, we were the first kids who grew up with PCs, right? With a computer, right? We learned how to program in, I don't know what it was, 7th grade, whatever it was, which is late by today's standards, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Oregon Trail
facilitated all of this, and we're the bridge from the baby boomer generation to the millennial and Gen Z, and we had this sort of latent need and expectation, and it's just so much more in the forefront with the current incoming generations that I feel like we can help facilitate that bridge from this group who is very app and technology communication oriented to our folks, our parents and their grandparents, who are very interpersonal communication oriented, and to kind of bring those groups together, because this one, right, the baby boomers, they're on their way out at a rate of 10,000 per day out of the workforce, and millennials, I believe, are already or soon will be the largest generation in the workforce. And of course, now, it seems like we just started talking about millennials in the workforce just a couple of years ago, and now Gen Z is entering the workforce.
Oh yeah, no, I'm old. I'm getting made fun
Yeah,
of.
right.
Left
I
and
mean,
yeah, like
there
I'm
are
32 and
there
I'm
are
being made fun
millennials
of.
that are 40 years old now, I
Right.
think, right?
Oh, yeah. The Gen Zer already looks at me as like, okay, boomer. I'm like, calm down, kid. I'm 32. All right.
Right.
I might have a messed up knee that had to get surgery because I can't walk that well and I feel pain in the morning, but calm down, kid.
Yeah.
I'll show you what's up.
Well,
But
now you know how we felt for the last 10 years.
Oh yeah, I've gone on an apology tour, apologizing to all the old guys I used to make fun of. I'm like, okay, so this is what life feels like. Like, why do we have to go to the bathroom so much? So in the meantime, but Scott, go ahead. I mean, I agree with you, Greg. Like, you guys are a vital role. I have the same thing on my staff. I have a guy who's just been in the industry forever, but as the boomers leave and the Gen Z, the millennials and the Gen Xers, like, are like getting that information is so vital, but it's something that like I know how to create, but it's also like I just don't have the experience that you guys do. Like, Scott, what do you think the value of the kind of the Gen X or baby boomer gap to the younger generation? How's that work out?
Well, we're all figuring out how to bridge the gaps across all generations, right? And we're also very mindful that we've got to approach putting labels on generations very carefully as well, and I think we can all agree on that. But for the sake of discussion, again, this is one of the better trends in global supply chain, which is its appeal more and more to the younger generations. If you look at supply chains, first off, two key points. If you look at supply chain, college, school program, curriculum, the growth of that, we've got over 500 programs now across just the states. And that's not even where the more explosive growth is taking place, which is globally. And then secondly, if you look at the enrollment in, say, the top 25 supply chain programs, according to Gartner and others, you're seeing enrollment trends. And I think the pandemic will continue to spike that, because now consumers, more than ever before perhaps, knows why, I'm going to say it, there's not toilet paper, on the shelf, or part of the reason, at least the mechanism behind it.
Didn't we?
I promise you I wasn't going to talk about that. I was going to bring up the Popeye chicken sandwich to say that's the supply chain issue, but you guys, I mean, yeah, that was a fascinating one.
The neat thing that all three of us can agree on is the demand shock, the historic demand shock, right? But understanding behind what's got to take place and why that can play out like it has. Consumers are figuring it out and love it, right? Because the consumer perhaps has never been savvier given the wealth of information at their fingertips. Well, to meet that consumer's demands, we've got to have the top talent, the top brains and minds, and the folks that want to relentlessly ask why or why not to the nth degree. We've got to have that type of talent in global supply chain to meet the demands now and moving forward. And that is beyond all the conversations we have, from Karn, Greg from Georgia Tech, to the panel at UGA and beyond, the interactions we have in the comments of our live streams from
Clay,
the younger folks, Clay Phillips, right, the dog at Supply Chain Now. The industry is competing for that top talent, perhaps like never before. I wasn't around when Model T came out. I wasn't around. None of us were around when all those historic moments happened. But man, right, that's the incredible dynamic that this global supply chain industry is partially riding on into the future.
So what is the role a content producer plays in the supply chain right now? It sounds like it's always one of those moving targets, right? We play this role, but we're playing this role. What do you guys think the role is right now? What purpose do we serve in the supply chain?
Greg, I'll let you, since I just made Kyle's ears bleed. Why don't you tackle that first?
Yeah, absolutely. We use 3 E's there: empathize, engage, and educate. Right? I mean, in order for people to hear you, you first have to hear them. Right? We're big fans of Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand. Right? And by doing that, you enable people to listen to you because they feel like they've been heard first. So empathizing is critical. Obviously, education is the ultimate goal here. And to get there, you've got to engage with folks. There are other E's and probably some other letters we could use as well. But the truth is that that's a great foundation for making headway here.
Yep. I would add, there's so many different reasons why we all three of us do what we do. I think there's two big ones that really stick out to me. The first is the more straightforward. It's organizations and leaders and professionals and folks still in school trying to figure out their path. They're all looking for solutions to problems. They're all looking for new points of view on old and new topics, and the topics that have yet to be really front and center of the industry, right? So continuing fueling that with best practices, been there, done that, mistakes and successes, and getting to folks that really are willing to share that in a transparent manner, because that's the other thing that the generations coming into industry demand, and ain't got no time for anything that's not transparent. And I love that. That makes everybody better.
That's critical for supply chain, right? I mean, aside from just plain communication, that's absolutely critical for supply chain, that transparency.
Agreed. And the second part that really gets my juices going and gets our team's juices going and many days has me spring out of bed. That's more of the noble mission, right? We're spending time this week with Jackie Robinson's youngest son, and we're going to learn lessons from his walk, his journey, and his father's journey, his family's journey, that undoubtedly will cut through the noise or universal lessons learned that in this day and age, when we're grappling with some of the toughest issues that divide us, we've got to look at stories like that we can get better as leaders, we can get better as professionals, and we get better as an industry. And that, being able to spotlight stories and conversations and frank learning opportunities like that, that's the noble mission element of what we do together to help bridge those gaps, which we were all talking about just a few minutes ago.
And I love it. I mean, you guys put out so much. And I think your point exactly, Scott, is dead on. I mean, I came from a nonprofit, right? So when we were creating content, it was truly raising awareness. Again, I worked for the National Fire Protection Association, who was all about like safety stuff, codes and standards, things like that. I did a whole podcast where I was in Lander, Wyoming for a week with a family that experienced kind of a home fire where they lost children, and telling that story and telling those important things. It was vital to talk about why some of the safety measures that they were advocating were important. But it's cool to see that like that's not just a life-saving thing. Like it kind of exists everywhere. The role content plays, like you guys say, is empathy, education. Like it's really educating, but also connecting. I think that's so valuable. What about content in general? I think it's one thing that's interest, right? Our role is kind of educating, but there's sheer amount of content that just is every week I'm on LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, there is so much more that's coming out, and every one of it's good. Like I'm always jealous. I'm like, oh geez, okay, what are they doing? How do I kind of see this type of stuff?
Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That moment. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I mean, what about the role of content? Do you think? I mean, especially because we're in B2B, right? This is a job, right? This isn't like my hobby. Isn't supply chain. Like it's what I do. I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. I'm speaking to people who definitely are closer to like the hobby is like supply chain, investigating that.
Supply chain geeks. You can say it, Kyle.
Sorry.
We're supply chain geeks. Yeah.
But what type of role does content itself? Like how important is the medium in which we're using to kind of get the message out? What do you guys view that? I know you guys live stream. You guys are doing short form content. You're doing long form content. You're doing it everywhere. What's the value, or what do you guys see as the value with that?
Well, if I could, I think you've got to really know your audience, and know that the podcast you drop in every Monday is not going to meet the needs of everybody out there. And the beautiful thing. We were talking generational earlier. The beautiful thing is the differences in all those generations. And then when you look at global supply chain and global business, and for that matter, the global community, all the differences there. In some parts of the world, they hadn't even been able to approach the notion of the circular economy and sustainability because they're still just trying to meet the needs and get stuff out and keep stuff on the shelves. And that's just one example. So I think one of the aspects, at least of our approach, is without trying to be all things, all people, because if our content's anything, it's very genuine. It comes from a very genuine spot, and where it comes with a very genuine objective, and that's informing, empowering, uplifting, engaging. We released an episode on business history on Monday, and I got to tell you, I was embarrassed because I didn't know Grace Hopper before the research of the podcast. And so learning those stories like that should uplift and inspire everybody. And for that audience, the Greg, Tequila Sunrise, talk about our difference and journeys in life. He's speaking to a very different audience there, and imparting the stuff that he's probably slept and forgotten about that so many folks can learn from. So I think knowing your audience and then creating and experimenting with content is so important, as experimentation in general is so important. Jeff Bezos, that's one of the things he sings about, right? But anyway, those are a few initial thoughts from me. Greg, what would you add?
Yeah,
don't say join TikTok.
What's that?
Don't say join TikTok. Whatever.
I still haven't done that. Honestly, it's a while to get Instagram, frankly, but I get it. I'm struck by the value of really, really basic content. I mean, content I would have considered beyond primary, below primary, right? Our latest thing, Supply Chain POW, we're doing 40 seconds on acronyms like FOB, and the FO doesn't mean what you think it does, Kyle.
I watched it. I know what it means. Straight on board. I watched your video with your horses and flies all around you. I'm dying laughing. I'm like, oh, right. I felt
great
like background.
I was in the vice presidential debate. I'm just glad it didn't land on me. But I mean, I think that's critical, is to understand that no matter how knowledgeable, experienced, or advanced a practitioner you are, some of the people who commented on that particular one, Kyle, were decades-long experienced supply chain professionals, and they had never quite understood what it was. And I'm going to let you in on a little bit of secret. I had to do research on exactly what it meant to do that video myself, because I had my own perception. I didn't want to have some really smart person out there go, that's not what it means at all. And I'm glad I did, because I was a little bit wrong. So I think it's important to understand that you can never learn enough. There's never too basic an information. The blessings of naivete coming into a marketplace. And I think that's additionally where the newer generations come in, is they ask why, because they don't know that the answer is because we've always done it that way, which of course is the worst answer in the world.
Right.
So,
they love search engines. I mean, we do the exact same thing. I have a whole whiteboard series where I literally just get my experts to draw on a whiteboard, like, tell me how this works, explain how LTL works, and like explaining the hub and spoke model and how it's all transferred and all this type of stuff was like, we're getting tons of views on this stuff. And again, content wise, I want to talk to you guys about short form versus long form, but it is very basic, but you're right. I mean, just the sheer amount of, like, you can't take for granted you can't just like, oh, everyone knows this. Like, creating that kind of simple stuff is extremely helpful, especially within supply chain, because you get kind of people that sort of just kind of assume they know what's happening and they don't talk. But I agree with you, the younger generation, I search kind of mostly everything. Like, I tell, when people ask me video editing advice, I'm like, google.com. Like, search
amen,
that,
brother.
Like, why?
That's exactly that's the new library.
Exhaust that channel, right? If you've exhausted that channel, come to me. But if you haven't even done one search on how to do like a fade, I'm like, don't bother talking to me. Like, I'm like, just watch a video. Like, it's very easy. People are much better than me have shown how to do this type of stuff.
No doubt.
But short form, long form. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an interesting thing, and you guys doing both. You guys are doing a 2-hour live stream. You're doing like a 90-minute live stream, and you're doing 4-minute videos, 40-second videos. What do you think's kind of more powerful? What do you guys think about that? Like, what are you guys leaning towards? For me, I get a lot of like, hey, give me short form from kind of the people, like the people on my staff that kind of want to send out this content. But I'm like, I can't get that information in 40 seconds. Like, sometimes it's going to take 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes 15 minutes. Like, I preach as long as it needs to be as short as it can be. But what do you guys think? I mean, this is more for me than even the listeners. Like, what do you guys think?
Right. This is just us talking here.
Yeah, this is truly now just us talking.
Well, there's so many factors that go into that. And as you were just setting up the question, there's so many different factors was flashing between my ears. I mean, are you looking to engage and gain and spotlight the voice of the folks that may be in the audience, which of course are live streams. It's really important for any live stream, not just ours, but any live stream that really engage audience. Have you ever been a part, Kyle, of an online event and they completely ignore the audience? And who likes those, right?
Right.
But But on the other hand, on the example like we were talking about with Greg's and the FOB part of the supply chain pal with supply chain now, which, hey, you got to love the cheesy factor, right?
I love that. I mean, that was genius by our interns, by the way.
Agreed.
They just came to us and presented that to us. That is the impact.
Did they give you the horse background? So did they give you the horse background? They're like, here's some great locations I've scouted for you, Greg, to go film.
That's just in my neighborhood.
Oh, that's pure talent. You can't teach that, baby.
But the brevity and the objective behind those are completely different, as we all know, than live streams, and even than the podcast. A recorded session where you're taking a deeper dive with just the featured guest. So I think, for me at least, the purpose, objective, what the message is all about, how we're looking to convey the message, what type of conversation or discussion is it going to be, and then beyond all of that, and a lot of other questions, is you got to experiment. You've got to experiment these days, perhaps more than ever before. The digital content space is so fractured. I mean, you've got a lot of large segment that loves Joe Rogan and loves other podcasts, right?
Right.
Amanda informs me each week all the cool ones out there, but and that's great. But then you've got, once you get down below the top a handful, it becomes a fractured, democratized content universe, and that's where you experiment and figure out where can you communicate from a position of expertise and genuineness and purpose, and then that helps us determine what type of content that we focus on.
I think you're dead on with the whole idea that it's goal based. I mean, content isn't. Again, we're just not like new. We're not sitting on the side of like a corner screaming like, "Here's the supply chain information." Like, there's got to be a goal with kind of what we're creating. Like, even though you're out there trying to educate, and like there is the idea of just really having empathy and kind of getting people to connect. But I think, like you say, like if you're engaging, if you want engagement, if you kind of want people talking back and forth, understand the channel, understand the medium, understand all that type of stuff. But like you said, it just moves so fast. I mean, it's one of those like. I love, I mean, you guys will probably laugh, but like I'll get some kids asking me they're in college, like, okay, what was the difference when you were in college compared to now? I was like, Twitter got announced my junior year. Like Facebook didn't have video. And they're like, what are you talking about? You're young. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm like, that's how fast this stuff changed. I'm like, there was no Facebook video when I was in college. It truly was about like sliding in, seeing what, if you could poke and see what was going to happen there. It was for dating. But yeah, I mean, Scott or Greg, what do you think in that kind of vein?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I have locked on these 3 E's suddenly, but I think, when I think about education, that can be very concise, right? That 40 seconds to 1 minute, depending on the type of education you're trying to provide, right? And then when you think about engagement, that's a little bit more. I mean, Joe Rogan, you can like him or not, but the truth is the guy is hyper engaged with his with his guests, and it takes as long as it takes. It takes till Ron White runs out of stories about scotch and falling down in the street, right? So, and then if you think about empathizing, you're elevating the story or exposing the story of someone's life. So that kind of takes as long as it takes. Now, I think you can also manage that, and we're experimenting with that. Well, we're not experimenting. We got a directive from our community base with supply chain or with Tequila Sunrise, because 4 people contacted me and said, I do this while I'm exercising. I don't want to exercise more than 45 minutes. So cut these episodes in half, because when you interview,
you got to do beats per minute
and founder of a company, and you kind of hear their life story and what their purpose is about and what they hope that the listener takes away, that can take some time, an hour and a half in some cases. So we are kind of splitting those down. I think there is a limit. And because ours is not an entertainment medium so much as a business to business medium, we have to be respectful of our listeners' time frame. And I think we're both respectful and appreciative at Supply Chain Now, because people spend an hour with us, over an hour when I get really involved, every single Monday and Thursday, and they do it live, and they do it virtually without notice. These live streams, it's hard to give notice for these live streams, though we're experimenting with some ways to do that. But these people, they get a notification, they come and spend an hour with us. So we really appreciate that. And I think, again, what you want to accomplish, what you can expect out of your community and your listener base, and what they feed back to you is a good guide for that.
Yeah, and it's also like the craziness of like people listen 2 times speed. Like I think a lot of it's like you got to kind of provide them this idea of like, here's what you're going to get from me. As much as I'm going to experiment, this is still what my foundation's built upon. So when you're coming to this content, you can listen to it while exercising and listen to it to 2 times speed, but I'm going to give you a pace that's going to be listenable and stuff like that. Listen on the phone, listen like everywhere. I mean, it's sort of the most interesting thing. One of the things you just mentioned, Greg, that I find very interesting is the viewer's journey. A lot of stuff, like my background was a lot of like create a short 30-second clip, create a 5-minute clip from that 30-second clip, and then create an hour clip. So if you have a webinar, you create 5 minutes from that webinar, create 30 seconds for social media. What do you guys feel the audience journey or the listener's journey has kind of been? Do you feel like it's morphing to someone who kind of views you on like social media, like Instagram versus LinkedIn? Do they continue through your live stream, or do you feel like there's people who really want to live, especially in the B2B world? We're not entertainment, right? If they just want to live here, do they just kind of stick to their lane, or do you feel like there is kind of, hey, I'm part of this ecosystem, I join it?
I think it's both, frankly, Kyle, but I think there are people who find their niche even within a community. I mean, look, everybody doesn't go to Aldi, right? Some people go to Kroger. So and that's why you're seeing us expand our offerings and expand the faces and voices that we have in the ecosystem at Supply Chain Now, is precisely because that. I mean, if you think about some of the shows that we're bringing out, some are about digital transformation, some are about transportation, some are about technology, history, right? I mean, some are about the digital technology, supply chain digital technology, and even further niche than that, it's mostly about planning, supply chain planning, and there's a niche for that. So I think it's really a little bit of both. I know that there are people who are in our main channel on our live streams and who listen to Tequila Sunrise, and likewise with business history and tech talk and all of that sort of thing. So
I think beyond that, I think undoubtedly there's folks that when it comes to digital content, they're more about the social media. They're more about popping in on a live stream and sharing a couple comments or asking a question. They may or may not, listen to the thousands and thousands of podcasts that are out there, right, and download it to their phone. Many don't, probably. Now, of course, the trends continue to change, but it's for some, the social media component of picking up on a quote or tuning into a live stream or engaging in the social community component, that's their engagement. For others, they never, we hear from people in our network that aren't part, they don't have time for the live streams and the Twitter interactions or whatever, but they listen to every episode because that's their, that's for them, that is their preferred approach. I think, one of the things we'd be remiss if we don't bring it up is something we're passionate about, and that's the veteran community. Kyle, on the front end of this episode, you talked about how the language differences and the acronyms and we've got a bunch of challenges just within the industry itself, right? Learning. Right. I come across a new acronym every day. I'm like, what is this?
Right.
But our veterans, veterans and our militaries think one language have certain acronyms and way of looking at things. And of course, our industry has one. And that divide is one of the great challenges we have. And so, with some of our programming, we're very passionate about it's spotlighting the challenges and the transitions and the stories that our veterans have. And it's a shame when you look at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and their figures based on the best data available, right? Over 40,000 veterans can be homeless any given night in the States. That
Wow.
is a crying shame. And of course, now we know there's going to be a certain niche that of our audience that really wants to dive into that. I wish it was a lot bigger, but there's a certain defined niche. But really, creating awareness, whether it's B2B, things that both you and Greg have both mentioned, or causes, or just important topics that folks need to hear about. We're going to give them a chance. They may or may not lean in, but we're going to give them a chance. And that's, I think, when it comes to content creation and the engagement of not just the community, but the engagement of the guests and the featured guests, those are really important considerations.
I think it stands out too. I mean, sometimes just a title helps people like be aware of something that they just really didn't know. Like I might not have the
Kyle, my least favorite component, Craig, is giving titles 100 characters or less to podcasts. Kyle, how fun is that?
I hate it.
That is the hardest thing in the business.
Yes. I want to emo it, like write the whole sentence out and stuff like that. I have a headline analyzer tool, and I sit there for like 30 minutes. I'm like, I gotta stop this. I'm just gonna say who it is and what they do. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I hate that part. I hate the whole trying to get attention. I'm like, come on, like if you find it interesting, you find it interesting.
Greg, I feel like Kyle's speaking to our soul with what he just shared in the last 30 seconds.
Well, especially that trying to get attention thing. I think that's a terrible idea. I really think trying to get attention is a terrible idea. I think you do present your message. You try to present it in a consumable and engageable way, but the sort of in a transparent way, right? But the sort of trying to market it. I mean, my messaging probably feels markety, but that's just the way that I am. I mean, I love the fun of going, hey, like this John Sicard episode with Canaxis. I love the fun of going, oh my God, you know what we did? We created a volatile cocktail in that meeting. Two really opinionated guys. So I use kind of a recipe and and here's how you construct the recipe thing, which probably seems markety, but it just struck me to do it that way. And at the same time, we've gone the other direction, right? You talk about, you really need to feel it. At least I need to feel it to do the content. So I sat down to do a show around 9/11 this year, and I couldn't get it out. I had the whole show prepared. I could not get it out. So I set that aside. I flipped on the mic and I talked about my experience on 9/11/2001, and that was my show. Now, I ultimately recorded the other thing, but truthfully, I had to get that out before I could say anything else. So I think, and I didn't really care if anyone listened to it, by the way, right? And I don't think anybody did, but I needed to say it.
Right.
And sometimes that's enough. And I think if you're that genuine, right? Scott mentioned genuine before. That's the key. That's what people will latch onto. As I've said many times, and I'm sure 1,000 people have, it's too hard to be somebody else for a long time. You're better off just being yourself.
And people connect with that. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, even with like the content I create in-house, right? I try to showcase my people. I want them in camera as much as they hate it. It's still seeing a face, like connecting. I got to look at your eyes, right? Like I want to do that, especially now that like you can't do that. So the idea that the more you can put people out there, the more you can kind of connect and like, listen, I'm only seeing my wife, my dog, and my kid every single day. To see other people and talk to other people is great.
Yeah, don't do it for yourself. Do it for me, please.
Right. I know we're getting late, but the one thing I want to talk about right before we wrap is the power of networks, because I think that's one of the most fascinating things with what you guys are doing. You guys have so many new shows, and like you say, it's a fractured market. Once you pass like the top 5, like it's very much niche. What am I interested in? This type of stuff. You guys are doing an amazing thing with networks, because you're bringing in all these different types of podcasts, different sort of like listeners of like, hey, I really care about logistics and beyond with Jamin, or the Tequila Sunrise, or even the history episodes and stuff like that. Right. How important is a network? How do you think important this is going to be kind of going forward of like, there's just too much stuff, and I'm going to like, I need to sort of join a crew, join in a gang more or less, right, of like content. How important do you think that is?
You got to specialize. And you got to specialize with the folks that, from a host standpoint, again, that can bring it from a point of expertise. They can bring it from a point of, I think I said genuineness earlier. I don't know if that's a word, Kyle, or not, but
I think it's genuinity.
We're all Southern.
There you go. Authenticity is so important in this industry, to points you both were making earlier, because that's what listeners want, right? They want that authenticity. They want the real conversation. If you wanted a infomercial as a podcast, you could download any of Ron Popeil's stuff, set it, forget it. But that's not many folks like a good infomercial. So I think it's really important to look at the leadership of each series, of each program, of each new initiative, and vet folks there, and then how you construct each of those, and what the target audience is, what the content, what's the engagement strategy there, and how will it be executed, and is there demand for it? I love what Greg shared a minute ago, because I think one of the neatest things as an entrepreneur, while you certainly listen to demand, and you create and build a wherewithal to meet and serve that demand. We both of us will admit to it, and our hosts, I'm sure, will create something because we think it's what we want to do, and it's what needs to be heard, or needs to be said, at least. Greg has a great phrase there. But we're really excited about what lies ahead, and we've got a couple things up our sleeves. I will let one slip. Supply Chain Now in Espanol, where it's going to be a Spanish language driven standalone program that's going to dive into all things supply chain and really beyond. And by leveraging networks and leveraging trusted partners there, we're going to serve a whole different new audience. And that's so important, because I think one final thing here, I think as Americans, and I'm guilty as charged, when we first stood this Supply Chain Now up, we were hyper focused on Atlanta, and certainly hyper focused on the U.S. And in this global economy, we got to take those blinders off, and we got to really uncover the wide range of issues and challenges and topics that the world cares about, not just what we see as Americans.
Oh, absolutely. I also think it's fascinating, for you guys, like you say, like you got to let your content creators know their voice. They don't need to be everything for everyone. So the idea that you can kind of have a network that's going to have all these additional things that can help out. I mean, closed captioning, right? I want to have closed captioning. I know how important it is, and just to make sure it's accessible to everyone. But it's also a one-man band. The idea of like the network where you guys kind of help the infrastructure of everything, but you still let creators be their own voice. It's so vital.
Right.
I think an important part of our principles too, Kyle, is our hosts are practitioners, right? I mean, even our master host, master of ceremonies host, is one of the most knowledgeable people in supply chain on the planet. There are no talking heads here. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I know you're new to supply chain, but you've learned a lot, and you're knowledgeable in your own right.
I think.
Well, we think so too. So that's good.
Oh, that's good.
But I think what that enables us to do is our creators being actual supply chain practitioners, is it allows them to have a conversation, to engage in a conversation with the guests, or to promote their own point of view, which is critical. And it's not just a phone-in show with truckers on the road, there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to be a little bit more multidimensional than that, I think. And that provides a tremendous value. That hits one of our E's, two of our E's, really.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was listening to a podcast from like the founder of Rivals, and then he went to 24/7 Sports, and he was talking about podcasts, and he's like, it's great because it's actual, like you say, it's people practicing. They're people in the thing. It's not opinions, right? It's not just bringing on a talking head to fill space and time. Like, you're gonna have people who actually know what they're talking about, who experience what they're talking about, who are in it day in, day out, really kind of doing that. And I think it's also bleeding over to the rest of the content. It's not just like, hey, I'm going to bring so-and-so from this magazine just to kind of give me their opinion / kind of like, here's the sort of information of the day. It's not CNN. Like, this is really content where you're learning and you're experiencing kind of personalities, and you're kind of growing with it.
I think that's what people really appreciate, is they identify with a knowledge, they identify with a personality, they identify with the trust that they have. That's the key word in this industry, is trust.
Yeah, good point. I just hope they don't identify with the bathroom really issue I had. Like, Hopefully that's not what they identified this episode with. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I know we went a little bit over. There was a little hiccups because we all get to use different fun platforms to stream and capture all this stuff. So all the fun things in the world. Scott, Greg, tell the audience if they, for some reason, don't know where to get you. Where's the first place they should be heading for Supply Chain Now?
Sure. So wherever you get the podcast from, and of course, supplychainnow.com.
Yeah. Obviously YouTube, and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Lord, Stitcher,
TikTok, Twitch,
no TikTok
Discord,
for me, but
which other
we're
ones?
probably headed there. Yeah.
You should check what your interns are doing. They might have you on TikTok.
They might. You're right.
Let us also say, I think I admire the approach that Kyle, you and the Consulting Logistics, but the greater Aborn and Company team approach. Y'all's approach and informing and facilitating discussions and investing in that is wonderful for industry. That's what we should be doing. And it goes beyond just, serving the customer. It's investing in the industry, and that can't be overlooked. So I appreciate y'all's approach. We look forward to collaborating with you in the new year. And Kyle, we're big admirers of what you do, and we need people with your, like you, with outside perspective in this industry.
Oh, you guys didn't need to stroke my ego that much. I mean, I'm just happy you guys joined the show. This
well,
is awesome.
You can edit it down.
Yeah, I cut that part out. Don't need me to get too happy about everything I'm doing. I got to stay thirsty. I got to stay hungry for content. I got to be out there in the content mines, just going.
There you go.
Scott, Greg, grinding every day, guys. Thanks so much for joining me today.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Very
Thanks.
much, Kyle.
All right, bye-bye. And that's our show. Have a question for Scott or Greg? Ask it in the comment section. We'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle MacNaught. Rock and roll.